Welcome to the Chronic Warriors podcast with Cassandra A. Campbell.
A platform to share,
Hear,
and cheer chronic illness warriors.
Just know that when you made your commitment to your partner, you took their whole selves.
To be able to have a bad day, to be able to say, do you know what, I can't cope no more.
I am a chronic warrior because every day I wake up and I'm so glad to still be here.
Hi Warriors, my special guests today are Nicola and Steve. Welcome and thanks for joining me, guys. How are you doing today?
Hello, how are you?
Hi, how are you doing?
We're good, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting us to your Chronic Warriors podcast. We're really, really happy to be doing this.
Oh, you're so welcome, and I'm really, really glad that you're here.
It's a bit of a weird one for me because I usually do the interviewing.
Right.
It's a bit strange being on the other end of the other side of the divide, Cassandra, as it were.
Right, okay. Yeah, because I do read a lot of your articles as well, which I think are fantastic. And I think the newspaper's fantastic. And as I say that, would you like to share a little bit about the two of you, what you do, etc.?
Yes, I'm a journalist by trade. I do political journalism, news journalism for the Canary. I also do music journalism, which involves reviews, interviews. I started a radio show last year. I do podcasts, television work. So yeah, this isn't in my comfort zone. I'd be much happier asking you questions.
Oh, well, not this time.
Yeah. Da, da, da.
Hello, my name is Nicola Jeffrey. I am your typical everyday council estate girl who, after years of experiencing various different medical issues and having various different issues with the system, I started activism, and as a result, I met Mr. Toffel. And yes, haven't been able to get rid of him since, basically.
Oh dear. So, Nicola, do you want to tell us a bit about your conditions?
Basically, long story short, very similar to other people with chronic conditions. I've had issues since I was a child. I actually remember having growing pains when I was in primary school. Had a bout of alopecia when I was around about 5. I had quite a serious illness, so I was hospitalised when I was 11. And we were told at the time it was meningitis, but looking back, it actually wasn't. Around about 19, I was finally diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And I also had a pregnancy. I had my son, who's now 15, and also had quite a bad time. During my early 20s, I was constantly trying to seek help. But unfortunately, due to just things like medical misogyny, I was dismissed as somebody who just had mental health problems. And it wasn't actually until my 30s I finally was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I had hypermobility spectrum disorder. I was able to get an upright MRI scan, so I have AAI, I have CCI. I was also diagnosed with ME. I was diagnosed with gastroparesis, dumping syndrome, non-epileptic focal seizures and tonic-clonic seizures. I have hypertension. I have megaloblastic anemia. I have temporomandibular jaw dysfunction, joint dysfunction of my jaw. And I also am suffering from something called mycotoxins, which is as a result of living in social housing. And because of the damp, it's caused an issue which isn't actually also recognised. So over the last 5 years of being with my partner, Steve, and effectively having someone with me that allowed the medical professionals to finally take me seriously, this is where we're at with my diagnosis.
Wow. I don't know how you remember. Have you got them down on a list?
I'm not going to lie, I had that written down. I would not have been able to have done that off the cuff.
I was going to say, that was amazing. I've heard and seen, on social media, so many people say it's been dismissed and it's mental health issues, and it just seems to be such a common story. I just think it's so disgraceful. How did you cope with that?
So the background to that was basically, there's a little bit more to it. I was in a relationship with my son's dad, who I no longer have much contact with. Basically, we were very young, the relationship became violent and I left. I went to social services, I asked for help, and I was put into a refuge. I was there for a couple of days, and sort of out of the blue, I had somebody come and question me and question how I was feeling. So I sat down and spoke to them, and within about sort of 10-15 minutes, they asked me to just sort of go outside. I was waiting outside, and then I saw a police van pull up. The police officer walked past me, and literally as he walked past me, my name was being repeated on his radio. So I looked at him and I said, "That's me. Have I done something wrong?" And he looked at me sort of just as shocked and said, "Are you Nicola Jeffrey?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, I think you need to come with me." I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to my son. I was put into a police van and I was taken to Green Park House in Bromley. I was held there for 9 days. I experienced my first ever panic attack as a result of the experience, and didn't really know what was going on around me, just very concerned, obviously, what was going on with my son. I was luckily able to find legal aid and a solicitor and push for a tribunal to find out what the hell was actually going on. And I was then dismissed 5 minutes before my tribunal 9 days later.
I think so.
And I then had to spend 2 years fighting for full custody of my son as a result of what happened. And if I'm honest with you, I basically felt that the initial sectioning was actually as a result to stop what would have otherwise been a domestic violence case with my son's dad. And as a result, everything was dropped. And it took 2 years for me to be able to prove that everything that happened was completely wrong. And I finally got full residency and full custody of my son at the end. So from that, I was then able to start really pushing with my medical side of things and show that what I was living with wasn't actually mental health. And then as a result, as I say, meeting Steve, I was finally taken seriously, and obviously we're at where we're at. So it's been a very interesting journey, to say the least.
Sounds like it. I mean, that's just shocking that you would have to go through that. It's really, really shocking. But I guess the silver lining is that you got through it, you got your diagnosis, and you met Steve.
Oh, definitely. And I think, if I'm honest, with this being a kind of a Chronic Warriors podcast, the most shocking thing, I wasn't able to access full Wi-Fi or broadband or any sort of internet access until 2015. So it's literally since then that I've been able to really start connecting with sort of people like yourself and other people who have experienced similar things. And what I found was the most shocking was that there are so many other people who have had similar experiences like yourself, and, you know, some of them like mine to the extreme. It's not as uncommon as we are made to believe, and as the medical community wants to believe. This isn't rare, it's just rarely diagnosed, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I totally agree with that. It's not rare. We think it's rare because it's not something you hear about often. ME, EDS, etc. We hear a little bit more about fibromyalgia, but then even people with fibromyalgia are dismissed all the time. It's all in your head. So it is great to have the online community and to be able to connect with other people who are in similar situations. You just don't feel so alone, because I used to feel when I was growing up, I felt like I was some kind of alien species because people were wrong with me and nobody could tell me what it was. You know, I was like, okay, what's so different about me? But over the last few years, really tapping into the chronic illness community online, it just really helps to know that I'm just not the only one. And I know that that helps a lot of other people as well.
Most definitely. And as you say, that kind of reaching out and realising that you're not alone, it was strange for me getting into activism. It was a similar situation. It was around about 2015, and I was watching I don't know if you know who Chunky Mark is, but I was watching a Chunky Mark video online, and it was of the DPAC protest at Parliament, and I was literally watching disabled activists being manhandled whilst they were simply just trying to protest and trying to, you know, fight for their rights. And I become so emotional. I joined DPAC. I literally joined them there and then, and as a result, I got very much involved in a lot of their protests, and that was literally how I met Steve. I kind of feel that it was meant to happen, because I most definitely would not have met Steve had I not have gone down that road of activism.
So Steve, how did you find it? How did Nicola tell you about her conditions, and, you know, what went through your mind?
Okay, so I knew Nicola's background already before we even met, because she was, as she just pointed out, a member of Disabled People Against Cuts, that's DPAC for short, which is a grassroots community-led disabled people's rights organisation I was already sort of working with them as a journalist. I was covering their activism and what they were campaigning for already, and Nicola was a fairly prominent member of that. I'm sure she won't mind me saying she has one of the louder voices in disability rights activism. So I knew who Nicola was already, and I knew she had a fibromyalgia diagnosis. I saw her physically when DPAC, along with members of the Labour Party and the Green Party, they blockaded Westminster Bridge. This was the September of 2016. And I kind of saw her then and kind of eyed her up, as it were. And then actually probably met her a few days later at a disability rights conference, and we got chatting. As I say, I knew she already had a fibro diagnosis at that point. And we sort of started chatting after that, and it was during our conversations online that she said she was looking into potentially Ehlers-Danlos because she'd had an appointment with a rheumatologist who suggested that might be what was going on, and she was already looking into it at that point. So, I mean, the thing is, I wasn't doing what I do, and much sort of professional and personal interests for me focus on disability rights and health inequalities. So I wasn't shy to the notion of chronic illness anyway. And so it was kind of, do you know what, Cassandra, we discussed all this because we knew you were going to ask this question. And we were discussing it and going backs and forwards. And honestly, I do not remember thinking much of it, if I'm honest, not in a dismissive way, but it wasn't a red flag like, oh my goodness, what am I getting myself into?
Yeah.
It was just kind of, oh, okay, fine, right. Well, what else are you interested in? Nicola isn't defined by her health as such. What's happened to her surrounding herself, I'm sure she'd admit, would define her, but it's not sort of front and centre to what we're about in many respects, and also why we met. It's really difficult. I didn't really think anything of it. It was just kind of, oh, we've got fibro, okay. Oh, you're looking into EDS, okay, that's interesting. So what are your views on this? What do you think about that? I can't give you some oh my god moment because that wasn't how it was. It was just one part of who we are, and we all have baggage, and we all have crosses to bear in life. I mean, Nicola met me. I'm a bisexual dry alcoholic who's been dry for 5 years, but has only been dry for 6 months when we met. So there was stuff going on with me as well at the time. We're all human and we all have different facets to our personalities and lives, and Nicola's health is just one part of those many facets, I suppose.
I know that my medical conditions were going to be an issue, but I think if I'm honest, I was actually more concerned about being a single mum on benefits from a council estate. I had this, amazing independent left-wing journalist actually interested. That was literally more my concerns at the time.
Right. And I think as I'm speaking to more and more people and couples and partners, it's so lovely to hear that. And even with my partner as well, that actually the conditions are not that much of a big deal. It's more about the person. And I think a lot of people with chronic illnesses, that is their worry, because it was a worry for me years ago. It was a worry. It's like, okay, I've got to tell them about this and how are they going to take it? But for me, I found that once I got to that place of acceptance of this is what it is and started to deal with it, that became less of a worry. I was more at a point of, well, if they can't accept it, then they're not the right person for me. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they're just not the right one for me. So hearing what you're saying, and Steve, it's not about you having to say, oh my gosh, it's just, this is what it was for you. And I just think that's wonderful. One of my favorite sayings is chronic illness is a part of me, but it's not all of me.
Yeah, exactly. Just on that point, I think with regards to what you're saying about that, there tends to be a almost fear and worry for people living with chronic illnesses that, oh, how are people going to react to this? How are people going to take this? And I think in some circumstances it is true. There is still a lot of stigma and especially propaganda surrounding disability and chronic illness, and that hasn't been totally banished from society. But I also think that there's sometimes unhelpful narratives which are pushed from certain communities and certain media that, oh, well, you're defined by your chronic illness, and people struggle to accept it and understand you, and that instills this notion that somehow people who are chronically ill are lucky if they have a relationship, and that they're by and large destined to almost sort of fly solo with their lives, as it were. And I think that's a misnomer in some respects. I think you have to find the right person and surround yourself with the right people. But I think by and large, I think that's quite an unhelpful kind of aspect that you quite often see being pushed.
Yeah, agree with that, definitely. Nicola, would you tell us a little bit more about your activism?
Yeah, sure. I suppose, if I'm honest, what really did it for me, when I was going to secondary school, I was actually sent off to a grammar school, which I absolutely hated. I never wanted to go to a grammar school. I wanted to go to the same school that all of my primary school friends were going to, or, you know, one of the same schools. And as a result of going to a grammar school, I think it kind of took me out of an environment that I'd grown up into and sort of shoved me into kind of more of a middle class world, where I'd come from more of a kind of working class background. And it really opened my eyes to things like classism within society and just the structures of society from quite a young age. And then having my son so young as well, and experiencing the ways that as a young poor benefits mum from a council estate, the way that I was treated via the system certain times, and just had such a tough time that I needed to reach out and I needed to change what was happening. I knew that I wasn't alone in what was happening, because I was able to sort of speak to people who were having similar situations at the time. So something inside me just wanted to do something about it, rather than just sit back, ignore it, or, you know, sit back and moan all the time. It's like, okay, well, what can I do? Something needs to be done. And it's just situations in life will lead you to a point where you either kind of give up or you just really fight. It's kind of fight or flight. And I think that's what it was with activism with me, if I'm honest.
So what kind of things do you do out there in the community and on behalf of the community?
I think for the last few years, since sort of meeting Steve, and we've been together for 5 years. The first couple of years I was fairly okay symptom wise, and then my body, I think it was because I was in a relationship, I was finally in a point where I felt settled. I think my body literally just collapsed and was like, right, okay, you can now just be as ill as you actually are. And so for the last sort of 2 years or so, we've been doing various treatments. So my activism has actually been quite quiet, but originally what I was doing was things like disability rights. There was a lot of social cleansing happening when I first got involved in activism, and it was basically rich people coming along and destroying council estates that had deliberately been left to rot and run down, and turn them into affordable housing, which was just leaving so many people from my background in situations that were just unbelievable. Also, there was a UN report that found our government guilty of grave and systematic violations of disabled people's civil and human rights. And I still to this day don't believe that it got the media coverage. I've spent a long time trying to help with basically disability rights and social housing issues. I think that really covers it. My son is dual heritage, so I am very big on Black Lives Matter. I think it is very important that racism and the growth in sort of fascism and just that sort of mindset needs to be tackled as well. So I think that pretty much sums it up.
And I get that whole thing of when you get into a relationship and you feel settled, you're actually just able to let go a little bit and take a breath, and you're not having to cope with everything on your own. It really helps me being in a relationship and being in one where I am comfortable to just be who I am and not have to put on that brave face all the time. For me, that makes a massive, massive difference.
No, I can totally relate to that as opposed to sort of earlier relationships when I was younger and now. I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm sitting here with a shaved head. I mean, I am that relaxed now. And, you know, we are that, I do feel that comfortable with Steve. And that didn't just happen. I think that took years of also you within yourself as a person, knowing yourself and being able to allow yourself to be that comfortable before you sort of find someone. I think you do need to also get to a point in your life where, you know, you have to just be you and you're not acting for someone. And that whole mindset of relationships, I think, is what's toxic. And I think that's one of the reasons why we do work the way that we do.
And what you were saying, that self-acceptance. And I think that's for anybody, whether you have a chronic illness or not. If you don't have self-acceptance, you're then not going to allow somebody to accept you for who you are. And it's going to be difficult for somebody to accept you for who you are because you don't even accept yourself. So with us, it's about accepting who we are as a person, but also accepting the conditions that we have and how they impact us. it's really important to then to be able to share your life with someone else and for it to work.
Most definitely. And I mean, it's got to the point now where Steve is my full-time carer. As I said at the beginning, I have tonic-clonic seizures. So for me, one of the worst elements is knowing that we'll go to bed of a night time and within the sort of morning hours, I'll be likely to have a seizure. I do lose bladder control as a result. So there's been many times where Steve's had to kind of deal with that. And obviously at first it was an issue for me. I was embarrassed. But you do have to get to a point where this is me. Unfortunately, I have no control. I'm not doing it deliberately. And I also have to look at it from another angle whereby I do feel incredibly lucky that I have found someone who doesn't just sort of run away from this, doesn't just dismiss this as it's too much for them to handle, and can handle it and does want to help. For example, if I'm having a gastroparesis flare, I'm often bedbound. I use a computer chair in my bedroom that I wheel over to the bed and I put a bucket on it, and that's basically how I'm able to vomit. And it can last for sort of 24, 48 hours. And again, Steve's absolutely amazing in being able to deal with this and being able to help. And as well as me getting to a point where I needed to accept myself, it has helped, as you say, to be with someone who allows you to be able to let yourself go. And yeah, I can't say that it hasn't been amazing finding Steve, and I do feel incredibly lucky.
Oh, that's lovely. And that's why I wanted to highlight the partners as well, because it's not easy. It's not easy for us and it's not easy for them. So it does take a particular type of person to be with somebody who has the challenges that we have, because not anybody could handle it. On the flip side, I don't know if I had somebody with my conditions, how I would be. I don't know, and that's just being honest. It takes a particular kind of character to be with somebody who goes through the kind of challenges that we go through. I think that's my opinion, because not anybody could do it. And I would imagine that it does impact your relationship in some ways. You know, it's not always going to be hunky-dory.
Oh, no, of course not. I mean, you've only got to ask the neighbours. We've had our moments.
How would you say it does impact you, and how do you both deal with it?
I'd love to be some sort of miraculous sage here and spout off all this wonderful knowledge and wisdom and insight. I just keep my head down and get on with it, basically. I suppose that there's several sort of ways we approach it, in terms of that everything that goes on in our lives, be it Nicola's health, be it my work, any issues or challenges which arise from those, at the root of it, we understand that anything that happens isn't either of our faults. We both of us always try our best in our relationship, and I can count on one hand actually the number of rows we've had in 5 years. We hardly ever fall out. And I know that sounds really Disney and kind of slightly sickly, but it's true. And I think it's because we both have the understanding and knowledge that actually if something's happening with Nicola's health, or I'm having a bad day at work, or there's some external pressure coming into us, whether it be, I don't know, housing association who we rent off, or something that the government's done, or everyday kind of pressures dealing with the Department for Work and Pensions. It's not our fault, and therefore our default reaction is generally we don't take it out on each other. I think that's quite important, and it's especially important in relation to chronic illness.
Most definitely. And with regards to sort of Ask the Neighbours, what was meant by that is we very much both love our music, and I think for me, when times get too much, I love to just vibe out, just listen to music. I think it really helps when everything does get on top. Steve is a DJ, and he is also a new music reviewer for Paul's Radio and for Reggaeville. So he has a whole other musical side to him as well. Music is a huge help. It's not ever really mentioned with regards to chronic illness, but from where I'm coming from, I think music really does and can help at some of the worst times.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I love my music as well, and I love my dancing too.
Yes.
So for me, yeah, I do. I love my music, and having that shared interest with my partner does help. As you say, it makes a big difference to me, and sometimes, especially if I'm in the flare up, just getting lost in the music helps just to relax me a little bit and just get me into a different zone. So yeah, I can totally see where you're coming from on that level, and maybe it's something that more people with chronic illnesses need to try and get into.
No, absolutely. I think just to interject there, it is about finding the things in life which make life that little bit easier, as Nicola says, music. But it's also about, you have to have hope, I think, as well. I have a lot of sort of belief in fate and positive and negative energy, and I think that there has to be a hope for something better, and hope that things can change, or hope that you can reach this point or that point, or another point. And I think that you always have to, however bad things get, life is transient, and however bad it feels at that time, so whether Nicola's just had a seizure which then goes immediately into a gastroparesis flare and I know she's going to be written off for a few days, that moment does pass. And there is, again, it sounds cliche, but there is always that chink of light at the end of the tunnel, as it were. And that's not to say that chronic illness goes away, but it's being comfortable and safe in the knowledge that, well, okay, when things are very bad, it is transient and it passes, and you'll be over this period soon, as it were.
Most definitely. And it is very much about the mindset.
Yeah.
It plays a massive part in just getting through every day. So would you say that for both of you, since being in a relationship and dealing with the challenges of chronic illness, have you learned anything about yourself that you maybe didn't know before?
Yeah, I think obviously sort of the obvious things that we've spoken about, sort of being able to be with somebody that allows you to kind of be as open as you are. In trying to get to the bottom of what is actually going on and whether or not we can do anything about it, and with Steve being an investigative journalist, we come across a doctor called Dr. Sarah Myhill, who I can only recommend to. She has books, she has a YouTube channel. The reason why we come across her was because of the fact that I had an ME diagnosis, and she is a private doctor who is adamant that ME is to do with the mitochondria dysfunction. And she has been able to actually give me a course of treatment along with a diet, a complete change of lifestyle, a complete change of diet, and a course of treatment of antivirals that really have made a difference to my life, and really has made a difference, quite ironically, sort of without even it meaning to, has had a huge impact on some of my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome symptoms as well. So I can only recommend sort of looking up Dr. Sarah Myhill. She has a paleo keto cookbook, and also the diagnosis and treatment of chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgic encephalomyelitis. As you can tell, I am not a doctor, so I do struggle with all of this, but treating
yeah, I struggle with that one too.
That one.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Oh no, seriously, I was never taught any of this. I've had to learn all of this, so you know, bear with me, guys, if I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. But if you listen, there is a point to what I'm trying to say.
No, I'm definitely going to check out your recommendation, because that sounds really interesting.
No, seriously, it's been amazing. What we've basically had to cut out carbs and sugars and go on to a high-fat diet, but it's kind of the right fats. And it's had a completely different impact on everything, my bowel function, just absolute day-to-day energy, fatigue, brain function. I mean, it's not been a magic cure. It's been sort of months and months. We're sort of 2 years into this now. And it was not easy for me to give up sugar. I was very much brought up on a Western diet. I love my sugar, I love carbs, and did not realise until I looked into a paleo keto diet how badly we eat as Westerners, and how poor our diet is with regards to the actual vitamins and minerals and, you know, any goodness that we do actually get. And so much of it is based on just sugar, carbs, quick fix energies that don't have any long-lasting good effects. So yeah, that's been a complete life-changing, something that I would advise anybody with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome to look into, because for me, I found it incredibly helpful.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I mean, I have tried some different things over the years, which didn't make much difference to me in regards to flare-ups and pain and stuff. So I kind of got to a point of like, I'm not punishing myself by not eating what I want. I mean, my diet got terrible, and I have cut out a lot of things and cut back on a lot of things. So I'm sort of in that place of, I don't feel like I want to punish myself by not eating what I want to eat, because I feel like I've got enough punishment on a daily basis.
feeling. I know the feeling, and I think with me, I got to a point where, Nick, it's all or nothing. You either do it or you don't.
Yeah.
And
Briefly, just for background to this, we should emphasise the fact that Nicola was extremely unwell at this point. So we met in September 2016. She went on her last protest march back in March 2018, and for the rest of the 2018 she essentially suddenly really deteriorated and was presenting effectively as severe ME in terms of that she was bedbound. She got a diagnosis of ME not just from one doctor but from several doctors. And obviously, knowing there's allegedly no cure for ME and they don't even know what it was, our options were limited. But we always think outside the box. And we thought outside the box on this. So we went and spoke with Dr. Sarah Myhill, and it's taken 2 years. We wouldn't go on record and say it's cured her because we're waiting on more testing. But it has changed her life, essentially. A lot of her joint pain has gone. She used to get cramps all the time. They've gone. Her brain function's improved. But it's taken 2 years. Literally, I gave up work completely for the first year and put my career on hold and spent a year literally doing this process. At one point, she was taking 83 tablets a day to get to the point we're at now. I mean, she still takes around about 50 tablets a day. And you have to be 100% committed to it. It isn't easy. It's been really, 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 really difficult and intensive and certainly life-changing. But we're happy and confident with what it's done. And as I say, this was for the ME. And interestingly, it also has improved a lot of her EDS symptoms. I mean, essentially what we're left with now, her worst issues in relation to the Ehlers-Danlos are generally neurological in terms of it's the seizures, gastrological implications from the neurological implications. But what we've been left with after this 2-year process with Dr. Myhill, we hope now issues just relating to Nicola's seizures, and it's the gastrological dysfunction that comes most likely because of the brainstem compression that's occurring up top, as it were.
Wow.
And I also have to say, just to sort of finish on that, that none of this was NHS. We had to go private for sort of 99.9% of the answers and the things that we have found. And the only way that that was possible was from the support that we had from the chronic illness community, from the activist community. There are a lot of socialists in this country, and they really did come out in numbers to help support us with a crowdfunder. And it was only through that I was able to get this support. So I mean, it was not easy, and it isn't easily available. And I think with regards to my activism and where I want to go with it, it will be to get this recognised and to allow for effectively more people like me from my sort of background who wouldn't otherwise have access to this, would otherwise be treated differently, making sure that their voices are heard and the treatment that I've been able to access is going to be available for others.
Sorry, to then expand on that further. This is where we get really passionate because it's been 2 years of our life, but it has been quite remarkable. And I suppose just to circle back to the original question you asked, Cassandra, which was what have you learned about yourself? For me, I've learned that what I thought I knew about medicine and healthcare was not quite what I really should have known. It's opened my eyes, especially to, unfortunately, the situation with the NHS. For example, I was, to be perfectly candid, part of my work and my activism was around the NHS and standing up against stealth privatisation that's been happening for many years now. And I support a publicly funded NHS completely. I'm a big advocate of the NHS. What I'm not an advocate of, and what we've learned the hard way during this process, is that actually the NHS is dire for people with chronic illnesses. The NHS expects people to go in one end ill and either come out the other end cured or dead, effectively. It's almost a factory production line, and especially for Ehlers-Danlos, so much we've had to do has had to be private, either because it's for waiting times or it's because of the limitations of the scope in which the NHS operates in terms of Ehlers-Danlos. I mean, a perfect example is we saw, I won't say the person's name or profession because it'll give away who it is, a leading consultant, world-renowned person. We saw them on the NHS and they said to us in no uncertain terms that the challenge you have in the NHS is all about circles. So there's a white circle, which is what the NHS says consultants are allowed to do. Then on the outside of that, there's a grey circle, which is kind of where NHS consultants can stray into. If they're careful, they can sort of say certain things and recommend certain other treatments, but they have to tread carefully. And then you have a dark grey circle outside of those two circles, which is outside of the NHS, where if they were seeing us privately, they'd be allowed to go. But the NHS restricts essentially what they can say and what they can offer. They, weren't the only consultant to say it. We've heard from other consultants as well. It's been eye-opening for me, a real life-changing, thought process-changing experience going through this with Nicola, seeing what most people don't actually experience with healthcare in this country, because you don't. I mean, most lay people in their everyday lives only experience the NHS when they have a trauma injury, when they have to go to the GP, or when they're diagnosed with something life-threatening, potentially incurable, or cancer, hopefully curable. That's most people's experience of the NHS. With chronic illness, it's completely different. You are reliant on this service and reliant on the people within the service. And you spend a third of your life juggling your appointments, managing your appointments, going to your appointments, following up your appointments. And the past 2 years for me have really exposed the faults within the health service. Like Nicola said, all the answers we have got privately. And that's not quackery privately. That's invariably seeing NHS consultants not within the realms of the NHS. I mean, like her upright MRI, for example, that's been the key to everything with regards to her EDS, because it's given us an insight and pinned down the exact cause of the majority of her symptoms. And we now know what the issue is with that.
Literally on the NHS, under the neurologists that I was seeing, I was told that my seizures, because they had no access to the upright MRI scan at that time, they told me that my seizures must be a childhood trauma that I don't remember. And it wasn't until we had the evidence from the upright MRI scan that we could show that there was the AAI and the CCI that was actually causing and part of the issue.
And the neurologist was like, well, I believe that you may have a repressed childhood trauma which is causing your seizures and the functional seizures, and they want to send her to Maudsley to see a psychologist for seizures. I mean, this is a whole nother podcast, Cassandra. This is another issue entirely. We'll draw this section to a close in a minute. But mental health related, her seizures were. And this was before she had her upright MRI. So Nicola had her upright MRI. It showed brainstem compression, which then led me to think, okay, so what could be causing her seizures? She had a 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test where you go on the bike for 10 minutes, do some riding. They hook you up to a load of machines. They monitor your, for example, your end-tidal CO2 levels. That is how much CO2 is in your blood. They monitor your blood pressure, heart rate, loads of other things. And it shows basically how well you cope with exertion. And it's quite a recognised thing within ME research that a CPET test is very good for identifying a symptom of ME, which is the post-exertion malaise and the exercise intolerance. But also these CPET tests, the 2-day test, threw up some other interesting anomalies in Nicola. And I pieced together what I thought was going on causing her seizures, because they're non-epileptic. Essentially, for anyone listening who's sort of interested in medicine, what's going on is her brainstem compression is causing what's called a right bundle branch block in the right side of her heart, which means that her heart doesn't beat properly. It's beating, but its beating pattern is somewhat uncontrolled. This then leads to something called an infralateral ST segment depression, where basically two sides of her heart don't squeeze properly. So you've got not regular beating, heart not squeezing properly on the right side. This then causes blood supply to the lungs, which is what the right side delivers, to be restricted. She's not getting enough blood to her lungs. Therefore, the blood that's going to her lungs doesn't get oxygenated properly, coupled with her megabelastic anemia, which means that her red blood cells don't carry oxygen properly, leads to a fall in blood pressure, which leads to something called vasoconstriction, where the arteries and veins mess up. This then leads to cerebral hyperperfusion, which is essentially a loss of oxygen supply to the brain, which then causes her to have a seizure. Now, I had to work this out because NHS neurologist...
I want to laugh and say, we don't do things by half, but I mean, what Steve has just sat there and said is, in my opinion, that's Nobel Prize. It really is. He has been able to work this out. We have gone through all sorts of NHS doctors, all sorts of private doctors, and it's only because of his journalism, and he has that side to want to be able to get to the bottom of it, that he can sit here and just say all of that and be able to have got to that point. I mean, I would have literally otherwise have been told that this must have been some sort of childhood trauma, or, you know, some sort of mental health, and oh, you're not eating properly. And it was literally what come back time and time again. And then obviously to get to this point now.
The point was that I pieced this together, what my hypothesis was. We took it privately to, a lot of your listeners will know who Dr. Nick Gall is. He's a neurocardiologist who specialises in POTS and orthostatic intolerance, but also the links between the heart and the brain. We saw Nick Gall privately, and I put this hypothesis to him, and he looked over it, looked at all the test results I came back with, and he was like, yes, I agree with that. I think you're correct. And this is emerging research coming out in the area of seizures with regards to brainstem compression that are non-epileptic. But we only got this because we went privately. Otherwise, she would have been seeing a psychiatrist for her seizures, which is absolutely effing ridiculous. That is the problem we have, unfortunately, with chronic illness in the health system. That was a long-winded way, I know, of getting to that point, but it's just one example in all Nicola's diagnoses, and that pattern has been similar throughout. And it really, this whole process has opened my eyes to the faults that lie within healthcare in this country and what needs to be changed. And we're the lucky ones. I mean, I'm a nosy bloody effer. That's why I'm a journalist, and it's because I'm nosy, and because I don't accept no for an answer, and because I always look beyond what I'm told and what people say to me. I mean, I have to speak to politicians, so, you know, I constantly, I don't believe what I'm told ever. And it's only partly because of that we've got to this point. Most people aren't privileged, because we are privileged. I know we're privileged to be in the position we're in. Most people don't have that privilege, and I dread to think how many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in this country are stuck with incorrect diagnoses because of the limitations of public healthcare in the UK. It's a real bee in my bonnet, hence why I've been talking about it for over 10 minutes. I'm going, shut up.
I mean, yeah, more and more I'm hearing of people having to go private, and that whole thing about you'll see the doctor under the NHS and then you'll see the same doctor privately, and so much more is done. And I think that is absolutely terrible, without going too much deeper into the NHS and how it works. Although I think it's great that we have an NHS, but it's the way that it's being run that is a massive issue for people with chronic illnesses. I think that we have to become our own medical experts. It can be a lot, and definitely I think having to do that by yourself is even more overwhelming. So having someone to share that with, I know that with my partner, and that's another thing that I love about him, he's similar to you in the sense, Steve, that people want to go and investigate, and he has a great understanding and an interest in science and the body and things like that. So he will help me sometimes to break things down so that I can understand it in layman's terms. You know, and so,
no, I can totally relate to that. Totally relate to that.
Connecting the dots, and even though with exercise, and I'm doing some rehabilitation stuff at the moment, he's got an interest in that. He used to be a personal trainer. He's learning still about how my body works and what it can and can't do, and the fact that it just can do crazy stuff as well that you wouldn't expect from somebody else. So I definitely think that having a partner, and a partner who is interested, really is such a benefit to navigate your way through life in general, let alone all the medical appointments and all the jargon and all the rest of it, and having that sort of support when you go to appointments and things like that. Because I know for me, there's been times when I've gone to appointments and by the time I come out, I can't remember half of what they said.
Brain fog takes over. The amount of times I've sat in an appointment and I've said, I'm sorry, hello, this is my partner, I'm going to let Steve do the talking. I've done it so many times because it's too much otherwise with what is going on. It's like we're not well enough sometimes to do the appointment. It's not really understood. It really isn't. So no, I can totally agree with that. And like you were saying about your partner, Mark, I think it's important that, you know, anyone can, if they have that nosy side to them, or that, you know, they just want to get to the bottom of something, anyone can look into this. This information is there if you look, and we were able to find it. Something that I learned from this that I didn't know before was that we as patients, us as NHS patients, we have a right to request our full medical file. You can find it online. There's a form that you print off, you sign it, you give it to your GP, and by law they have to give you your full medical file, which goes back to when you was born. And it was literally from me doing that, I was able to show textbook EDS symptoms for myself. I then was able to also do that with my mum. I went and requested, with her permission, her full medical file, and was also able to go back and see that there is now a family history as well. This isn't a one-off. And obviously, as you know, I'm a parent. This led to also my son now being diagnosed as well. And my two brothers are also in the process now of looking into this and getting this done. But I mean, again, the only way we will get this confirmed at the moment is by going private. We are struggling to get anywhere with NHS and genetic testing. It is very difficult to get that support. It's not confirmed, but it is really important. If people are struggling on their own, if people are in relationships and they know there's more going on, they know themselves, you are able to request this information and it is there. You just need to sort of know where you're looking. And I think that was where I'm very lucky to have found Steve. Steve knows his stuff, to say it mildly.
So what would you say you admire most about each other?
Wow. For me, what I admire the most about Steve is there's just something about him. Like you said before, Cassandra, that you felt very different growing up. There's something about Steve. He is very different. He's special. He stands out, very unique. And I think that's what I absolutely admire and love about him, if I'm honest.
That's embarrassing. For me, what I admire about Nicola, she doesn't like to admit it, but she is exceptionally intelligent. She has the most brilliant mind, and that was sort of what clicked with us immediately, that we're both on the same sort of political and social and philosophical wavelength more than anything else. She's got this sharp mind, which is constantly working. I also admire and draw off her resilience as well, because however many times she's beaten down by the system or other people or her illness, she still manages to drag herself back up again and keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And that's quite remarkable, especially with her background. I mean, being sectioned because they thought you were making up your illness is quite some trauma to go through.
Oh, yeah.
And she's every day bounces back that alone, let alone anything else. So sharp mind, funny. We like the same kind of music. Yeah, we think the same. You're sometimes destined to find someone in life. I think we all go through the motions with people sometimes. I think some of us are fortunate enough to eventually settle with the one, as it were. And I think I sound really awful and cliched through this. This is terrible. This is like, I don't know, Channel 5 fare. I don't know what I'm doing. So
it's kind of bright red at the moment.
I know. I'm off to write a rom-com script. She is the one. I know she's the one. I knew from the moment I met her. And it's the foundation of our relationship. That's the other thing, actually, that we remind ourselves of quite often, however bad things get. And I said earlier about we don't take things out on each other. Also, we remind ourselves that we wouldn't be doing all this if we hadn't have found each other anyway. I mean, neither of us really know where our lives would have ended up if we hadn't have met. So there's a lot to admire in Nicola.
It's wonderful. I love it when I have the partners and the couples on. I do. I love it, and I love to hear that. You can feel the love in the room.
That's nice. That's nice. We're nice to know we're putting out positive vibes, positive energy. That's good.
Most definitely. It's all about positivity around here. So would you say there's anything sort of quirky or funny that Nicola does because of
do you know what? We looked over this. We're so organised. See, it's me. I was like, right, Nicola, these are the questions. We need to sit down, look through this, blah, blah, blah. So we kind of looked on this, and I don't know. It's very...
We do. I think we just are. I think that we can't answer that question because the truth is we are really just quirky anyway. So
we ain't normal in any sense of
imagination. I suppose we do would come across to others as probably quite funny and quite quirky. So I don't think we have an answer to that. That just is us.
Yeah, we're not. We live a strange kind of existence, I suppose. Our existence is quirky in itself. I mean, as Nicholas said, this whole process with Dr. Myhill, we drink glasses of salt water every day, which probably sounds really peculiar to most people.
Not table salt.
No, it's not table salt.
It's not. It's a special type of salt.
It's very interesting. You know, we've been discussing this a lot lately as a couple, actually. I was just sort of side-eyeing Nicola going, should I say this or not? We've been discussing this as a couple a lot lately, and about after sort of the past few years of Nicola's treatment program, which was then compounded obviously by the pandemic, because we were locked down. We were double locked down because we were already locked down because we were treating Nicola before the pandemic happened. We've kind of realised we're not sure where we fit in, Cassandra, really anymore. We are quirky in itself, just generally, because our diet and our routine, down to the minute details, like we don't drink tap water at all, for example. We live a strange existence, and we're coming out the other side of this 2 years of treatment and pandemic. It's changed who we are. Really, we're different people to how we went into this back in early 2019, and for both of us as individuals but also as a unit, it's kind of like a rebirth, if you like, and we're both now having to refine our direction and who we are and where we're going in life. But don't want to tell you, being an alcoholic, how many times I've rebirthed myself, only to regress back into the metaphorical womb again and have to go through the process again. But this time it's something we're doing together as part of a partnership. But yeah, what is quirky? I don't really know.
I think the problem is, Babes, it's because we are just quirky, and this is why we're sitting there like, okay, so what do we do? I think just everything that we do.
I mean, we could reel off EDS stuff, which is quirky. Your listeners have probably got loads of their own quirky.
For example, Steve's sitting here with a shaved head, bright red Mohican. I'm sitting here with a shaved head. We are just, in general,
So, for example, that happens.
We're not your usual everyday people, to be fair.
No, and that happened the other day. Nicola's been complaining for ages because of the EDS. It's difficult to do her hair all the time because she had to use straighteners. So we kind of thought, okay, well, we shaved half of the hair off, or rather a hairdresser is, just to give her one side to deal with. So it's kind of that undercut look, and it was still causing her problems. So literally the other day, she took the decision and we just shaved all her hair off, and she's got a skinhead now.
And I saw it, and it really suits you.
Absolutely love it. I was really not sure whether it would suit me, and since I've done it, I have felt really free and really fresh and really comfortable, and I've saved so much time as well and energy in trying to, you know, fix your hair, wash your hair, sort your hair out as a woman. I'm very much into the sort of non-conformity, and this is my non-conformitist moment, I must say. It's been really helpful with just everyday kind of neck issues, shoulder issues, and just adding to it when I was dealing with my hair. It's, oh my God, it's been so much easier. So yeah, I would recommend that to anyone. If they're brave enough, go for it. If you're brave enough, go for the shave, seriously.
I've shaved off half of mine, so
that was where I was initially. So for the last month I had the half head look, and I just went for the whole lot. Again, if you're going to do it properly, do the whole thing.
Yeah. Funny, because my partner Mark, he calls my hair the Hair Chronicles.
Okay.
And I used to have my hair sort of like past my shoulders, lots of it. You know, sometimes I'd have a big afro, sometimes I've had it straight, and it did get to a point for me, particularly when I injured my wrist. Even though over the years, to be honest, I've cut my hair really short, I've grown my hair, I've done all sorts. I'm just that kind of person with my hair anyway. But I got to the point of finding it increasingly challenging to do my hair. So right now I cut it down really, really short and shaved all the sides. And then now I'm locks in my hair, which I'm hoping over time will be easier to manage, but I'm going to keep it short for now, and I'm going to see how I get on with it. But I'm keeping my shaved sides, because then also my hair is quite thick, so it's like quite heavy sometimes on my neck.
Mine is. I've got very, very thick hair. For a white girl, my hair's really thick, and it actually goes quite curly as well sometimes. It doesn't actually have a natural curl to it. It's just very sort of wavy. It's a bit weird. So I have to either kind of sort of style it, straighten it, and it was a nightmare. So good luck with your locks. I hope they help. I hope, you know, that makes life a bit easier. Yeah. But seriously, don't feel no way to go for the shave. I did it, and I genuinely feel much better for it.
Well, I actually had my hair really, really short, probably just a little bit longer than yours, when I was about 21. So I have been there. I don't know if I'm ready to go back there again yet. But yeah, so I've been there. Yeah, I like to be a bit wild with my hair sometimes.
Why not? Seriously, why not?
Guys, you've been on such a journey, and all that you've been through, Nicola, you separately, and then the two of you as a couple. It's just wow. I'm so happy that you're coming out the other end of it, and there is seeming to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's a really important message to put out there as well to people in regards to not giving up on themselves and on their health. It's just been so enlightening speaking to you, and just so inspirational and empowering. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Can I just add sort of a final thought, as it were? I know a lot of people living with chronic illnesses and impairments will be listening to this, and they will be single on their own, feeling quite isolated. And I imagine a lot of people will think, oh, well, that's for them, it's okay for them. You know, she found a sort of fairly well-known journalist and blah, 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 blah. I think why we got together was we were moving in the right circles and good circles for us. And I don't want people to come away from this thinking that, oh, well, lucky them and lucky Cassandra that they found people, because the only reason me and Nicola met was through online communities and engaging with people online and engaging in the right communities and engaging with the right people. And I think that's what a lot of it is about. You need to maybe look at your circle and who you interact with, and maybe look a bit further than you normally would. And because I believe there is someone out there for everyone. I think that if you just start thinking outside the box a bit more, and because we want people to take something away from this, and I think the main takeaway from this is that there is hope. If you are feeling on your own and are feeling isolated, you just need to think outside of where your head maybe normally is at, and look further and involve yourself in communities online, involve yourself in organisations, get involved with whether it be support groups or political activism groups or disability rights activism groups, or even just sort of fun community groups, and branch yourself out a bit more.
Steve says sort of look outside the box, and my mindset at the time was always kind of people need to connect the dots that they wouldn't otherwise have connected. And it, you know, it's however you look at it, I think it's definitely important. We would never have met just sort of walking down the street. It was only because of the things that we were involved in and the fact that we were already at a certain mindset that we were able to find each other, and I think that's really important. But I also want to say thank you very much for having us. It's been really lovely to actually speak about all of this, and you know, in the way that we have. And it has been an honour to be able to do this, and you know, to be called a chronic warrior is quite an honour, I must say. So thank you for that.
No, thank you, Cassandra. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it.
And I'm going to flip it at some point this year, and you can answer my question.
Oh my gosh. Okay. You're going to put me in that spot, yeah. I think what you guys were just saying, I think it's a wonderful message. Regards to sort of thinking outside the box and what circles you're in. I think that's brilliant. Couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you for that. And again, it's been wonderful having the two of you on. Really, really nice, and you've just put a nice angle on this conversation, and I can't wait to get it out there. Yeah, it's been fantastic. Nicola, before I go, could you finish this sentence for me? I am a chronic warrior because.
I am a chronic warrior because I know that if I listen to that voice inside and I believe in myself, no matter how difficult things can be, medically or otherwise, I will always keep going. I am not going to give up. And I wasn't prepared for that one. I really wasn't prepared for that one. Why am I a chronic warrior? Because you know what, if I was honest, my first response would be because I don't take no shit. But clearly... I think the reason why am I a chronic warrior? Because I want to change things. I know what I've been through, and I want to make it better for other people. And I don't care how ill I get, I am determined to make a difference and to make a change. That's why I'm a chronic warrior.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, guys. I can't say how much I've appreciated you coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
You've been listening to the Chronic Warriors podcast. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share this podcast.